He never said a word. Not when he was arrested. Not during questioning. Not even in court. Day after day, the trial moved forward. Witnesses spoke. Evidence was presented. Accusations grew heavier. And he stayed silent. No defense. No explanation. Nothing. At first, people thought it made him look guilty, but by the time the trial reached its final moment, that silence would become the one thing no one could ignore. Before the truth unfolds, subscribe to the Unheard Witness, because sometimes the most powerful statement is the one never spoken. The case began with a financial crime. A large company reported missing funds, not small amounts, millions. The kind of loss that triggers immediate investigation. Internal audits revealed irregular transactions, transfers routed through multiple accounts, hidden inside normal financial activity, carefully disguised, but eventually uncovered. The digital trail led to one employee, a quiet figure in the finance department, someone with access, someone with clearance, someone who understood the system well enough to hide movements without raising alarms. The company acted quickly. Authorities were notified. The man was arrested. During interrogation, he said nothing. Not denial, not confusion, just silence. Investigators assumed it was strategy. Maybe he was waiting for legal counsel. Maybe he was protecting someone. But as hours turned into days, the silence remained. The evidence built around him. Access logs showed his credentials used during the transfers. His workstation had been active during key moments. Encrypted files were found on his system. The files that appeared to track financial movements. The prosecution believed the case was strong. Everything pointed in one direction. And the man at the center of it refused to say anything in his own defense. The trial began. The courtroom expected answers, but none came. The prosecutor presented the timeline. Funds moved gradually over several months. Each transaction small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to accumulate into something significant. The method showed intelligence, patience, control, the kind of behavior expected from someone inside the system. The jury listened closely, because the story made sense. The man had access, he had opportunity, and now he had no explanation. Witnesses took the stand. Supervisors described his role, his responsibilities, his ability to move funds between internal accounts. Everything matched the pattern of the crime. Colleagues testified about his behavior. Quiet, reserved, focused. He kept to himself. No close relationships at work. No obvious personal struggles. Nothing that stood out. Except now. The defense attorney faced a difficult situation. A client who refused to speak. No alternative explanation. No clear argument. Still, the attorney proceeded carefully. He challenged the prosecution's assumptions, asked about system vulnerabilities, possibility of credential misuse, potential external interference. But without a statement from the defendant, every argument felt incomplete. The jury noticed, because silence in a courtroom can feel like an admission. The judge watched the proceedings closely, because something about the case felt unusual, not wrong, just incomplete, as if a piece of the story was missing. The prosecution introduced digital evidence, logs from the financial system, each transaction tied to the defendant's credentials, each timestamp aligning with his work schedule. The pattern looked clean, too clean, but no one questioned it, because the silence made it easier to accept. The trial moved forward, day after day, evidence after evidence, and still, nothing from the man at the center of it all. Then the prosecution presented the most damaging piece, a final transfer, the largest one, executed late at night, outside normal working hours. The system recorded the defendant's login, his credentials, his authorization. Everything pointed directly at him. The jury leaned forward, because this was the moment that sealed the case. The defense attorney stood slowly. He asked the court to review that final transaction more closely. The judge allowed it. The timestamp appeared on the screen. Late night, unusual hour. The defense asked a simple question. Was the defendant scheduled to work at that time? The answer was no. The prosecutor explained it easily. Remote access. Employees could log in from outside the office. The explanation sounded reasonable, but the defense was not finished. He requested additional system data, network access logs. The court paused, because this had not been presented earlier. The judge allowed the request. The logs were displayed. The connection for that final transaction did not come from the company network. It came from an external source, at a different location entirely. The courtroom shifted, because now the story had changed slightly. The prosecution adjusted quickly. The defendant could have logged in remotely, used his credentials from anywhere, still possible, still consistent. But the defense introduced another detail, the IP address, the location linked to it. It was not a random location. It was another office, a secondary branch of the company. The jury exchanged glances, because now the case was no longer simple. The defense attorney continued. He asked if the defendant had access to that branch. The answer was no. He had never worked there, never visited. The prosecution hesitated, then suggested credentials could still be used remotely, from any device, anywhere. The explanation held, but only for a moment. But because the defense revealed something else. The system required two-factor authentication for remote access, a secondary verification sent to a registered device. The courtroom grew quiet, because that meant one thing. Whoever logged in that night needed more than just credentials. They needed access to the verification device. The defense asked if the defendant's device had been used. The records showed no such activity. The verification had been approved from a different device, one not registered to the defendant. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer about guilt. It was about doubt. The judge leaned forward slightly, because the case, that once looked certain, was beginning to shift. The defense attorney paused, then looked toward his client. Still silent, still unmoving. But now, that silence felt different, not empty, intentional. The defense made one final request. He asked the court to review internal employee access records for the secondary branch. The judge approved it. The data appeared on the screen. Employee entries, access logs, movement records, and then one detail stood out. An employee from that branch had accessed the system at the exact same time as the final transfer. Someone with administrative privileges, someone who could override standard security. The courtroom held its breath, because now the possibility was clear. The crime had not been committed by one person, or at least not the person sitting in silence. The prosecution tried to respond, suggested coincidence, suggested shared access, but the timeline no longer supported the original story. The defense stepped back. He said nothing more, because he did not need to. The evidence had already begun to speak, and for the first time, the man at the center of it all looked up, not to defend himself, not to explain, just to watch, as the silence he maintained from the beginning finally forced the court to look deeper. And once they did, everything started to change.